Thank you so much for those kind words, and I want to say a special word of thanks to Massimo, whom I met last September and who then invited me to this conference, and I'm thrilled to be here and have enjoyed conversations with a variety of people and look forward to sharing this work with you. Okay. And if you find that my labels are a little bit small, please feel free to just move over or move closer. We art historians like to, there we go, sorry, like to label things. Here we are. Okay. Yes, it will be more visible over here. So I've changed my title just a little bit, knowing that in this amount of time I need to focus just on one artist, so I'm really talking about Wassily Kandinsky today. Early 20th century artists and theosophists could never have imagined the way in which cultural developments in subsequent decades would transform their shared interests in the ether of space and the spatial fourth dimension, so in tune then with contemporary ether physics and popular ideas about higher dimensional space, transform these into a system perceived to be archaic and out of touch with contemporary thought. Yet the popularization of Einstein's relativity theory in the 1920s would severely undercut both of these ideas, transforming science into an abstract mathematical realm in which the fourth dimension was redefined as time versus space, and the ether was essentially dismissed as irrelevant to physics. As we shall see, that radical break with the early 20th century worldview was certainly one of the factors that affected the way art historians and critics approached the art of painters like Wassily Kandinsky or Piet Mondrian later in the 20th century. And today, actually, I won't talk so much about the spatial fourth dimension. I've written about that extensively. I'm really focused on recovering this idea of the ether of space, which was so central to the early 20th century worldview. To provide a little background to my talk, just to suggest here, style-oriented formalist art criticism, exemplified by the Museum of Modern Art in particular, had become so dominant by the mid-20th century that spiritual values in painting were most often bracketed out of any discussion of modern art. In addition to the development of formalism, another factor that surely contributed to the reluctance of American critics and historians to address the centrality of theosophy for artists like Kandinsky was the publication in 1947 of T.J. Robsjohn Gibbing's book, Mona Lisa's Mustache. The book was a bestseller for the prominent firm of Alfred Knopf, who ironically was also the publisher of the books of Russian mystic philosopher P.D. Uspensky, which had actually inspired another pioneer of abstract painting, the Russian Kazimir Malevich. Robsjohn Gibbing's text was a diatribe against modern art and its supposedly dangerous anti-scientific involvement with occultism and magic. As an interior decorator, Robsjohn Gibbings was hardly in a position to write knowledgeably about modern art, and indeed his book was a sensationalist attack on modern artists, whom he saw as leading culture astray in dangerous ways. Robsjohn Gibbings heaped scorn not only on Madame Blavatsky, but also on the dangerous Eastern thought of Hinduism and Taoism, as well as Kandinsky's, quote, non-objective painting. This, he asserted, was nothing more than an extension of Besant and Ledbetter's thought forms, or as he added in italics, and one senses with a smirk, it is a byproduct of astral manifestations as revealed by theosophy, spiritualism, and occultism. Typically, Robsjohn Gibbings had no sense of the widespread interest in thought transfer via the ether at the turn of the century, which was of great interest not only to occultists, but also to scientists such as Sir William Crookes and Sir Oliver Lodge. Mona Lisa's Mustache certainly cast a pallor over the post-war years in the U.S., making curators and critics extremely nervous about acknowledging the major role that mysticism and occultism had played in the evolution of modern art. Not until 1986 would a major exhibition address the spiritual and occult dimensions of modern painting, when Maurice Tuckman and Judy Freeman organized the exhibition The Spiritual in Art Abstract Painting, 1890 to 1985, for the LA County Museum. Although Robert Welsh, another important pioneer in this field, published his essay on Mondrian and Theosophy in the Guggenheim Museum's Mondrian retrospective of 1971, there had been considerable resistance at the museum to its very inclusion in the catalog. And as we know, and you may not know, but indeed, Mondrian's engagement with Theosophy has continued to be marginalized in major exhibitions, such as the 1995 retrospective at the National Gallery in Washington, and most recently, a major show in Paris. Thankfully, there is a growing willingness to consider the entire cultural context in which modern artists were operating, as evidenced by a wonderful conference last September in Amsterdam titled Enchanted Modernities, and books such as Alex Owen's The Place of Enchantment of 2004 and Mark C. Taylor's 2012 book, Refiguring the Spiritual. In the latter text, which addresses more contemporary artists, including Steiner disciple Joseph Beuys, Mark Taylor argues, quote, "Art cannot redeem the world without redeeming itself by refiguring the spiritual." Rob's John Gibbings, like so many others later in the century, had no idea that in the early 20th century, theosophists like Blavatsky, Annie Besant, C.W. Ledbetter, and Rudolf Steiner were astute observers of the signs of anti-materialism in the latest scientific developments. With the emergence of late Victorian ether physics in the later 19th and early 20th century, their writings were very much in line with the popular scientific worldview. New discoveries and developments such as X-rays, radioactivity, the Hertzian waves of wireless telegraphy, and speculation on the ether of space, along with the widespread interest in the popular spatial fourth dimension, suggested an invisible meta-reality beyond the reach of human perception and traditional materialist science. Indeed, theosophical texts and lectures served as major routes for the popularization of the new scientific ideas. At the same time, they made the Society's beliefs widely available. Looking back, what open-minded individual would not have wanted to be a part of an organization with the aims the Theosophical Society advertised? The presence of the word science here in this list of its goals, in particular, is the second one, to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. This presence of the term science is a reminder that we must always look closely at contexts in which that word appears. In ISIS Unveiled of 1878 and The Secret Doctrine of 1888, for example, Blavatsky rails against positivist materialist science. At the same time, she cites work by the prominent chemist William Crookes that suggested support for theosophical doctrine. Blavatsky found particular inspiration in the book by the physicists Balfour Stewart and P.G. Tate of 1875, titled The Unseen Universe, which pointed up the new interest in the invisible that would come to be associated both with the ether and the fourth dimension. The prevalence of ether physics from the 1890s through the 1910s made it a period in which much theosophical writing was able to draw parallels between the Society's doctrines and the new science in order to clarify and validate those doctrines. So just to talk for a moment about these scientific developments, the transformation of conventional notions of space and matter in this period was rooted in the series of scientific discoveries in the 1890s and the early years of the new century. Of these developments, X-rays, discovered by Wilhelm Röntgen in 1895, had the most dramatic public impact. They made solid matter transparent, revealing previously invisible forms, and also raised fundamental questions about the adequacy of the human eye as a perceiving instrument. Along with the X-ray, the development of practicable wireless telegraphy in the later 1890s, based on Heinrich Hertz's confirmation of the existence of electromagnetic waves in 1888, suggested a new image of space as filled with vibrating waves. This recent chart of the electromagnetic spectrum on the right echoes the diagrams and charts widely produced in this period, charting the vast invisible ranges of invisible vibrations that surround the narrow band of visible light perceptible to the human eye. And there's, again, this sense that it's just that rainbow fraction of the spectrum that we perceive. This was a powerful revelation. Indeed, there was a much greater sense in this period than now of the unity of nature as a realm of vibrating waves manifesting themselves as different phenomena according to their varying frequencies. I have to say, having cell phones have made it much easier to explain to students this presence of vibrating waves, those long, loping radio waves that find their cell phones and fill this space, but of course we're not seeing them. In the early 20th century, the widespread popular coverage of wireless telegraphy, in particular, focused attention on the mysterious substance termed the ether of space, posited by scientists as the necessary vehicle for the transmission of wave vibrations. The impalpable ether was understood to suffuse all space and to interpenetrate all matter. Beyond the X-ray's actual breaching of material surfaces, confidence in the solidity of matter had been further challenged by J.J. Thomson's detection of the electron in 1897 and by Henri Becquerel's discovery of radioactivity in 1896, as well as the Curie's identification of the first radioactive elements in 1898. It was often suggested, in fact, that all matter might be radioactive, offering the startling image of objects endlessly emitting particles into the surrounding ether, a view widely popularized in the best-selling books of French author Gustave Le Bon, and this work of 1905. At the same time, physicists such as Lodge, building on Lord Kelvin's concept of the vortex atom, proposed that the ether might be the very source of matter itself. Grounded in the electron and its interaction with the ether, what was known as the electric theory of matter appears in the writings of both Kandinsky and as well as the Italian futurist Umberto Boccioni. As I have suggested, theosophists and other occultists embrace these new scientific discoveries. According to a passage in Besant and Ledbetter's 1905 Thought Forms, which was subsequently removed from later editions, quote, "As knowledge increases, the attitude of science toward the things of the invisible world is undergoing considerable modification. Ether is now comfortably settled in the scientific kingdom, becoming almost more than a hypothesis. Röntgen's rays have rearranged some of the older ideas of matter, while radioactivity has revolutionized them and is leading science beyond the borderland of the ether into the astral world." In this period, the division between science and occultism was hardly a clear one, with the physicist Lodge, the chemist Crookes, and the astronomer Camille Flammarion all interested in phenomena such as spiritualism and telepathy, and theosophists eager to justify their positions via the newest science. Although time prevents me here from addressing it, Besant and Ledbetter themselves pursued what they termed occult chemistry, applying clairvoyant techniques to explore the inner structure of the atom. And literature scholar Mark Morrison, who is here, has written extensively on this topic in his 2007 book, Modern Alchemy, available at the book stand outside. Although Besant and Ledbetter's Thought Forms has often been treated as a unique discussion of thought transfer in the early 20th century, it was but one part of a much broader interest in ether vibrations as vehicles for communication of thought. Hippolyte Baraduc in Paris, whom Besant and Ledbetter cite as their scientific counterpart, drew on contemporary scientific conceptions of a vibrating ether as well as occult theories such as Baron von Reichenbach's odic force in his experimental photographic work at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. Albert de Rochas likewise drew on von Reichenbach as well as physicists like Lodge. Baraduc was particularly interested in the interaction of the human soul and the surrounding ether. His 1896 text L'âme humaine, ses mouvements, ses lumières et l'iconographie de l'invisible fluidique documents his use of a photosensitive plate, at times aided by an electric current, to record the different stages of that interaction of the soul and the ether, including what he titles the luminous vibrations of the soul. For Baraduc, these psychicons, as he called them, recorded the thought or state of mind of the subject, and these photographs interested not only Besant and Ledbetter, but also Kandinsky. Besant and Ledbetter were also undoubtedly aware of William Crookes's views on ether vibrations. In 1898, in his presidential address before the British Association for the Advancement of Science, Crookes had asserted, Ether vibrations have powers and attributes equal to any demand, even to the transmission of thought. Just a few words now on this mysterious subject of the ether, which we've kind of forgotten, thanks to Einstein. Although the luminiferous ether had been a part of physics since the 1820s, what was new in the later 19th century was the additional functions being attributed to it, including its possibly serving as the very source of matter. Early conceptions of the invisible, impalpable ether ranged from a thin elastic jelly to a swirling fluid. In order to transmit vibrating electromagnetic waves, the ether required the rigidity of an elastic solid, yet at the same time, it must allow the free motion of bodies through it and be rarefied enough to flow through the interstices of even the densest matter. Not surprisingly, writing on the ether by both scientists and popularizers is filled with metaphor, including its comparison to smoke or fog, or to water flowing through a sieve. As science writer Robert Kennedy Duncan declared in his 1905 book, The New Knowledge, emphasizing the continuity signified by the ether, not only through interstellar spaces, but through the world also, and through our own bodies, all lie not only encompassed in it, but soaking it in it as a sponge lies soaked in water. How much we ourselves are matter and how much ether is in these days a very moot question. The ether also had a long prehistory within occultism, so that by the early years of the 20th century, it was a truly resonant concept for theosophists as well as scientists. In 1877, in Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky set forth a variety of ancient associations for the ether, identifying it with the anima mundi, or world soul, and a variety of other concepts, including, quote, the deity in the shape of the ether pervading all things of the Hindus and the astral light of the Kabbalists. Blavatsky also discussed it in relation to the newest science, while she made certain to emphasize that the ether, as understood by theosophists, signified something beyond simply, quote, the modern ether, such as is recognized by our scientists. She typically included references to recent physics in her broader view. Quote, ether, the celestial virgin, the spiritual mother of every existing form and being, from whose bosom is, as soon as incubated by the divine spirit, are called into existence matter and life, force and action. Electricity, magnetism, heat, light, and chemical action are so little understood even now that fresh facts are continuously widening the range of our knowledge. Who knows where ends the power of this protean giant, ether? As noted earlier, Blavatsky often drew on the work of Crookes, but on the ether, she had a specific new source, Stewart and Tate's 1875, The Unseen Universe. Seeking to reconcile science and religion, Stewart and Tate had declared their belief in an unseen world behind, quote, the hideous mask with which materialism has covered the face of nature. For these authors, the ether was a potential link between things seen and unseen. As they explain, in fine, what we generally call ether may not be a mere medium, but a medium plus the invisible order of things, so that when the motions of the visible universe are transferred into the ether, part of them are conveyed as by a bridge into the invisible universe and are there made use of or stored up. Excuse me. For theosophists, the widespread contemporary awareness of the scientific ether and its relationship to matter provided a context that made it easier to convey to an audience the notion of ever higher levels of existence beyond the physical world. Ledbetter, for example, explained in his 1902 An Outline of Theosophy, in a chapter on the constitution of man, quote, to these inner worlds or different levels of nature, we usually give the name of planes. We speak of the visible world as the physical plane, though under that name we include also the gases and various grades of ether. To the next stage of materiality, the name the astral plane was given by the medieval alchemists, and we have adopted their title. Within this exists yet another world of still finer matter, of which we speak as the mental plane, because its matter is composed of what is commonly called the mind in man. Ledbetter could turn to the scientific ether itself to help explain the interpenetration of astral matter and the physical world. Writing in a passage in Man Visible and Invisible, which was deleted from later editions of the book, he asserts, "It is universally recognized that ether penetrates all known substances, the densest solid as well as the most rarefied gas. And just as it moves with perfect freedom between the particles of the denser matter, so does astral matter interpenetrate it in turn and move with perfect freedom among its particles." Although Ledbetter associated the etheric body with the physical plane, as in this chart from Man Visible and Invisible, Rudolf Steiner differentiated the ether body more specifically from the physical body as what he termed the life body, or the life within the physical body. For Steiner, it was the ether body, life body that formed the transition to the sentient soul of an individual. As he explained, a portion of the ether body is finer than the rest, and this finer part forms a unity with the sentient soul, while the coarser part forms a kind of unity with the physical body. In his discussion in both Theosophy of 1904 and Occult Science and Outline of 1909, Steiner was careful to note, like Blavatsky, that the ether he was discussing, quote, means something different from the hypothetical ether of 19th century physics. And indeed, William Kingsland, in his book of 1911, The Physics of the Secret Doctrine, used the term, quote, hyper-metaphysical iter, A-E-T-H-E-R, to distinguish Theosophy's ether from that of ether physics. Yet the model of the impalpable, refined ether of science in its relationship to matter clearly was useful in conveying these erudite doctrines, and, as we shall see, certainly attracted the attention of artists who for centuries had been focused on matter and space as their subject. And as I'll turn now to Kandinsky, pioneering scholars Sixton Ringbaum and Rose Carroll Washington Long were the first to establish Rudolf Steiner's importance as a stimulus for Kandinsky's evolution of his abstract painting. Restoring the ether to the discussion of Kandinsky and Theosophy now opens the way toward new insights into his art and theory. Steiner's extensive discussions of the ether, including in his 1908 Theosophy, which Kandinsky owned, would have augmented the artist's engagement with contemporary discussions of both the nature of matter and the possibility of vibratory thought communication by figures like Baraduc, along with Besant and Ledbetter. Steiner's interest in the ether would have been evident to Kandinsky as early as the 1904 issue of the journal, his journal, Lucifer Gnosis, which Kandinsky also owned. There, Steiner quoted Lord Balfour, another British scientist, in his 1904 presidential address before the British Association. This is Balfour speaking. "It seems now that the ether may be the stuff out of which the entire universe is built." Recovering the context of ether physics and its presence in Theosophy sheds new light on Kandinsky's comments in his treatise of 1911 on the spiritual in art, where he writes, quote, "Professional men of learning who test matter again and again, who tremble before no problem, and who finally cast doubt on the very nature of matter, which was yesterday the foundation of everything. The theory of electrons, that is, the theory of moving electricity or the electric theory of matter," he says, "designed to replace matter completely, finds at this moment bold champions." So he's very aware of this new science. In the catalog of the 2006 Tate exhibition, Kandinsky, The Path to Abstraction, a German art historian, Reinhard Zimmermann, wrote suggestively of Kandinsky's painting of 1913, Landscape with Red Spots. As he writes here, in this painting, "The various color zones have the appearance of free-floating mists or colored billows of steam. Sometimes they look like swaths of clouds. In this composition, matter seems to have shifted into a different physical condition. It is as though it has liquefied, dematerialized." And we can ask ourselves, what are we looking at here? Although Zimmermann acknowledges Kandinsky's theosophical sources and uses the term ether and ethereal in passing, a knowledge of the history of ether physics and the theosophical and occult response to it provides crucial new clues. Although Kandinsky For a time used a system of hidden images of the apocalypse based on Steiner's theories, as well as his reading of Maurice Maeterlinck. His goal was for his paintings to communicate directly by means of pure color and dematerialized form. He sought to create vibrations in the soul of the viewer, he said, and he certainly derived inspiration for his belief in thought transfer from theosophical writings, including those of Besant and Ledbetter. Significantly, though, his sources included, as I've mentioned, the Paris-based photographers Baraduc, as well as Louis Darget, and the French occultist Albert de Rochas. And as I have mentioned, Besant's interest in people like Baraduc, as she wrote in her 1904 text, Theosophy and the New Psychology. Something of the nature of electric action accompanies thought, and we are still within ordinary scientific experience when we state the possibility of these vibrations being conveyed through the ether without wires. So we discover, indeed, I'm going to condense here a little bit, that Kandinsky is working in a milieu in which this notion that thought can be communicated through vibrations, that he wants to set up vibrations in the soul of a viewer, as he said, is deriving important support from theosophy, from science, and from this intersection of the two. Kandinsky considered, and mentioning that Besant also is part of this then, Kandinsky considered spirit and matter to be degrees on a continuum of condensation and refinement, and ether as spirit or dematerialized matter might well be what we are looking at in his mature paintings. In 1913, he wrote of the center section of this particular painting, "Here the pink and the white appear as if hovering in air, as if surrounded by steam." Citing the effects of a Russian steam bath, he continued, "A man standing in the steam is neither close nor far away. He is just somewhere. The feeling of somewhere about the principal center determines the inner sound of this whole picture." Here Kandinsky's reference to steam, like the fog or smoke that served as metaphors for the elusive ether, is highly appropriate to this contextual reading of his paintings. Ringbaum also suggested in 1966 a comparison of Kandinsky's mature paintings to Steiner's description of spiritual worlds filled with, quote, freely floating colors and forms detached from material objects. With the recovery of the theme of the ether and its degrees of increasing rarefication in theosophical doctrine, Steiner's discussions of what he terms the country of spirit beings in sources such as his 1908 Theosophy takes on more cogency. There he describes a dematerialized realm, a, quote, spiritual world woven out of the substance that constitutes human thought, substance in a very figurative sense, of course. In this world of archetypes, another word that Steiner uses, synesthesia, a subject of great Kandinsky, was also at work, according to Steiner. Every color, every sensation of light corresponds to a spiritual tone. Every interaction among colors corresponds to a harmony or a melody. Although Kandinsky, through his friendship with Arnold Schoenberg, much preferred dissonances in music to traditional harmonies, his vision of a realm of dematerialized, vibrating, ethereal elements does suggest parallels to Steiner's discussion of, quote, a soul-permeated, spirit-permeated world of light, of color, of tone. With their visual and oral clang, Kandinsky's non-material forms create the dissonance both he and composer Schoenberg believed could lead to the consonances of tomorrow, the harmonious spiritual future in which he believed so deeply. His art and theory were clearly nourished by his theosophical reading, by other occult sources, and by the larger early 20th century milieu of ether physics, in which the boundaries of the real were so porous, as a historian of science has written recently. In contrast to the arguments of Rob's John Gibbings, Kandinsky was not operating on the fringe in this period. He and other modern artists interested in theosophy were in the mainstream in responding to the popular scientific and spiritual cultures of their time. Thank you.